I feel like some of the most empowering moments of my labors were really about like when I was able to let go enough to be like, I am limited in what I can do here. Really, what I can do is center myself as best as possible emotionally and have trust in myself and trust in the people who I have around me.
Calling all supermoms. Grab your coffee, tea, water, smoothie, wine, or a cocktail, and join us for a dose of laughter, camaraderie, and the reassurance that you are not alone. We're diving into the complexity of modern motherhood because every mom deserves a mic drop. I'm Vanessa McAfee.
And I'm Renee Arthur.
And we are the hosts of the Motherhood Moments podcast. We are two sisters from Michigan who both had babies during the pandemic. After a few years of getting this new role of motherhood under our belts, we felt curious about how other moms are doing this mom thing. We decided to dive deeper and interview some amazing moms in our network, and we want to bring you into our network and share their stories with you.
Hello to our wonderful Motherhood Moments listeners. I'm so excited today. We have a truly remarkable guest on our show to share her journey into motherhood. Born and raised in the heart of California, Emily's life has taken her on a remarkable adventure, from Northern California to international travels, and eventually pursuing her graduate degree in landscape architecture. What makes her story even more captivating is her transition from the professional world to days full of amazing, challenging, and surprising motherhood moments. Today, Emily will share her experiences of community engagement, research, and design, and how those skills have seamlessly woven into her role as a stay-at-home mom. Join us as we delve into her insights on personal growth, parenting, and the ever-evolving journey of partnership. It's a conversation every mother won't want to miss. Welcome, Emily.
Hi, guys. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right. So we like to ask all of us the same question, and we know that you have 3 young children. So tell us, how did bedtime go tonight?
Well, luckily I was out of the house, so it went well, which is usually how it goes. If I'm not here, it goes well. Yeah. So that's how bedtime went tonight. Last night during bedtime, I hid in the room, so I wasn't seen. So bedtime also went well last night.
Oh, wow. What time do your kids go to sleep?
Bear, she goes to bed around 6:30, and Nugget and PT go to bed around 7:30-ish or so, depending on how many yayas they need to get out or distractions they need to pull up. It's generally around the same time for the most part. If P is able to do bedtime, everything tends to go a lot more smoothly. If I'm around or if they know I'm around, then Tina has an epic meltdown and starts calling for my name. And so that she doesn't wake up there, I then go in there to manage the situation and bring her down to a point where she can calm down and hold her stuffy and then be like, okay, I'm ready to listen to a story. For whatever reason, at the moment, I am like the high value parent. And that means there's fighting and bickering that happens between who gets to cuddle with me at bedtime.
Oh, wow. Okay. So they all want to be with you.
At the moment, yeah, which is a nice transition because Nugget has not always wanted that. It's in one way, it's like really nice. It's taken a few years for us to get there. Whereas PT has just always just wanted me. She is less willing to share me. And Nugget is at least old enough to reason with and be like, look, once PT goes to bed, I will cuddle with you for a little bit.
Oh my God, I love it. I love this speaking to a world with 3.
I know. I can only imagine.
When I came home tonight, like before this, P was walking out of the room and it's hilarious because I can tell he fell asleep for a little bit while he was in there. but it's also he looked like the soldier coming out of war, like that kind of look, like head down, like I beat it. So
That's a really good way to describe like the final moments of bedtime.
Hmm.
it's like the final moments of bedtime, and then also the grief you have around the few moments you have left of the day to yourself.
Right?
Oh my goodness, so true. For me today, bedtime went okay. BK seems to have been settled. I'm trying to get him to sleep at 9, which that's going in the right direction for us. He got to sleep even later than that. But his dad doesn't finish work until 8 and sometimes isn't home until 8:30. So if he goes to sleep early, there could be days where he doesn't see him at all. And it just makes me feel a certain way. So that's held me to a later bedtime just for that little bit of bonding. Because it would just be all the time. He wouldn't see his dad. To accommodate my new schedule, he's got to go to bed a little earlier. So, and I'm learning that's better for him as well. He's in bed by 9 today.
I think Lolo is still awake.
Just scratching at the door.
I hear Lauren's having a negotiation.
It's not over yet.
Not over yet for him.
We're going to get into our questions, starting with talking about your home births, which I personally am so excited to learn more about. I know it's going to be very educational and informative for our listeners. I wanted to ask you, how did you approach birthing choices and decision making with regards to childbirth?
Funny enough, so I saw a movie in my 20s called The Business of Being Born. And that was a very informative movie because I had never considered home birth. I didn't know it was a thing, but I learned home birth as a choice, and also how our healthcare system, there are some unintended consequences to labor and delivery practices here in the US that can negatively affect women and babies. And after watching that movie, it just gave me a new perspective that childbirth doesn't have to look a certain way.
Hmm.
And I think it's very empowering just to understand that there is a choice. Yeah, so that movie just really resonated with me, especially because, frankly, I had had doctors or gynecologists who I felt were so self-righteous or patronizing, just rude. And so I felt like I had enough negative experiences with disrespectful physicians to warrant looking outside of the traditional medical system. And I also knew people who had home births. I was able to learn a bit through them and their experience. What's funny is I actually really love hospitals. There's a lot of energy, stuff's happening, lots of people. I love that. Nevertheless, once I started going down the home birth road and just getting more information, I knew it was a good fit for me, especially because I don't like being told what to do. Based again on my own experience, I felt like I was going to be maybe unintentionally disrespected, demeaned, neglected in some way, and forced to make decisions that I didn't want to or have to make because some physician was either having a power trip or wanting to leave early or whatever.
I really relate because I also watched that movie too, and it totally changed my perspective. I was a women's studies major with a focus of gender and health. I think I watched it for a class.
Yeah, I feel like you watched that in college. Because I kind of remember us talking about it. I feel like I've seen it too. This is many years ago. But
Yeah. Yeah. I think we're definitely going to link that documentary in the show notes because I don't hear people talking about it as much, but I remember when it first hit the scenes that we were kind of like, oh, is this what's happening? Like
Mm-hmm.
the statistics on the macro level are jarring.
Yeah.
And it definitely impacted me as well with how serious I was in my pursuit to have as natural of a childbirth as I could. I ultimately still decided in a hospital setting. For my first one, everything that I wanted to go, the plan transpired. So it was a good experience in that sense. I was also very paranoid about where I would give birth, and I was particularly worried about racism. So I decided to have my baby right in the middle of Detroit, and most of my delivery team was African American, and that was a great experience for me. I definitely can relate to what you're saying with how your past experience with the medical system just comes to your mind when you're deciding what to do, and you just make a call, like the start of mommyhood.
Could you talk a little bit about how did you put your team together? Since you're doing it at home, doing it like all on your own, how do you start to do that?
So I was newer, like when I moved here, I didn't have as many friends, but I knew someone who had a home birth. And, it's like the snowball effect happens. And so I asked her, and she gave me a number of people to contact, like midwives and doulas. But actually, when I found out I was pregnant, I went in for my first OB appointment. And they started giving me all the spiel about the hospital, the whole process. And I said, "Oh, I plan on having a home birth." Then that nurse practitioner, she brought the head of midwifery, the hospital midwives, into the room to talk to me. And she gave me the name of the midwife that I ended up using for my home birth. What was interesting is that I later found out that a lot of hospitals and OBs in general won't see you, or won't, they, at least at that time, they wouldn't take you on as a patient because they would consider you too high risk if you're considering home birth. But I was lucky and that didn't happen to me. And I don't know if that still happens actually. But nevertheless, my midwife's name was Stacia, and she actually took on midwifery students, so they would get some of their hours in with her. So the team was really made up of one more senior student and one more junior student.
That is so interesting. I don't think I was expecting you to say that you connected with your team from starting with the traditional system.
I wasn't either,
That was a curveball.
but that's good to know.
Yeah, I will say this with my second, it was different because I was in a different state. And so there I found like a mama, new parent center where you could do yoga with your kids, or you could take lactation classes. And from there, they had a list of midwives and doulas that you could just call up. That's how I found our second midwife. I talked to a number of them and see who fit and what would actually make sense from a logistical standpoint, like how far away do they live, right? Do I feel like I could trust this person? Because my first birth with Nugget was in some ways really easy, but also there were complications to it. And so I wanted more support the second time. And so I got a doula who I really enjoyed and found separately through this organization as well. But the midwife and the doula didn't know each other. It was their first time working together, which was odd to me because I'm like, don't all you guys know each other or something? But no, it was just coworkers who work in the same office but never see each other kind of thing. So
Yeah.
We want to know a little bit more about in the moment, either pregnancy, any moments of empowerment or feeling vulnerable during your labor.
yeah, the labor is what comes to mind first, of course. So what happened with Nugget's birth, I had a postpartum hemorrhage, or post-delivery hemorrhage, whatever you call it. So after I gave birth to her, I hemorrhaged. There was this moment where I knew it was a significant amount. I could just tell by the energy that was happening in the room at the time. I knew in that moment that, so if you panic and your adrenaline goes up, then that makes your blood move faster. And also, just stress itself is not conducive to healing either. So I knew in that moment as I was hemorrhaging that I needed to stay really calm just because I knew it was a serious medical situation, and I would have potentially exacerbated the situation had I started to get really panicky and nervous about what could happen. And so instead, I stayed really calm and just I trusted my midwife completely. What the hell was I going to do? I was just laying in bed bleeding. Yeah, right. Like, I'm not going to get up and call a doctor. So that was her job, and she took care of it. That was a very empowering moment for me. With Nugget, I would say the vulnerability. I mean, it's my first baby. And at that time, I was very much on my high horse about home births and how it was the best way, right, to give birth. And once I really got into the labor, I immediately was like, oh, I get voluntary C-sections. I get it. Like, all humility. Like, I was so vulnerable, like humility could really flow in, right? In one respect. In another respect, it felt very lonely. And it felt very lonely because it was just my husband and I in the house, and I was like in a warm pool, right? It wasn't painful. Like, the way most people talk about their labor in this country is that it's this horrific pain. And maybe that's true. I don't know what other people's experiences are. All I know is that how the pain of labor had been communicated to me, like culturally and with family and whatnot, was that it was the worst pain ever. And you're going to want the drugs. So I just assumed I will know when active labor is happening because it's going to drop me to the floor in agony. And that's not what happened. And so because of that, I didn't call my midwife because I just assumed I wasn't in active labor. But because I was like, well, this isn't the worst pain I've ever felt.
Sure.
And consequently, I'd been in labor for a while. I have no idea, 8 hours or something. So I was just like in this little tub, like on my hands and knees, because I remember hearing about how hands and knees was a great position to be in. And to be on your hands and knees for hours at a time is exhausting. And so finally, around, I don't know, 8 o'clock in the morning, I was just like, so can you call Stacia? I'm getting tired. And so P called her and she came over right away. And by that time, I was already pushing. That feeling of being alone was probably the most vulnerable part of that labor because I didn't have a team around me. I didn't have people around me. I had P, but what the hell is he? He doesn't know. What's he gonna do? Like, he would help me with labor pains and whatnot, like by holding my hips and everything if I needed it, or giving me electrolytes. But other than that, like, there wasn't a lot for him to do or that he knew he could do. I didn't know. So I couldn't ask for it either. And with Tina, that was a very intense labor. It was short and she came out hot. It was a very quick, less than 2 hour labor, very intense. It was an entirely different labor. I felt very empowered because I asked for help. I just made sure I had some safeguards in place for myself so that emotionally I didn't feel so alone. So I didn't have to feel that type of vulnerability. And so just the process of me asking for help, being like, I need a doula because I need someone there who's just going to be with me and know what to do, who's not medical, who can either help me with movements or relax or whatever. I knew enough about what I needed to know that I needed to ask for help in those areas. And that in itself was very empowering. And also the fact that it was a fast labor and it was, I don't like using the word pain with labor because my association with the word pain feels like it's when my body's telling me something's wrong.
Mhm.
And that's not the feeling I get when I've been in labor. I wish there's a better word for uncomfortable. Great discomfort. Nevertheless, I've got to get her out now. And no matter what, I just, I wasn't waiting for any breath. I just pushed her out and I was fine. I was afraid of tearing, but with PT, she just popped right out. I just felt grateful that I knew to listen to myself. And at that point, I knew a little bit more about how to listen to myself. That was very empowering. With Pizzi, the vulnerability, it was the first time I'd pooped in front of strangers.
I knew you were going to say poop.
You knew it? Yeah. It was the first time where, it's one thing to do that in front of my husband while I'm in active labor. It was another thing to do it with the door open and three people who are not family within 15 feet. That was vulnerable.
Extremely.
Yeah. And with Bear, her labor in itself she was born breech. She was at home as well. She wasn't supposed to be, she flipped right before I gave birth. And so just the fact that a foot came out first, she was born, I think it was like within 45 minutes or something. It was a very fast labor as well. And our midwife lived close by, but there was a great deal of vulnerability when I realized it was her foot first. Again, it was okay, I'm going to be calm. And luckily, our midwife was very well trained in breech births. I feel like some of the most empowering moments of my labors were really about like when I was able to let go enough to be like, I am limited in what I can do here. Really, what I can do is center myself as best as possible emotionally and have trust in myself and trust in the people who I have around me. That's a practice I work at just in my regular life, aside from labor, because it was quite scary, of course, to all of a sudden have a baby coming out foot first. And also, like, from the point that I knew I was in labor to when I started pushing was 15 minutes. And so my midwife had to book it to get here. So all of it was just very surprising, but I trusted her and I trusted myself. So yeah, it was vulnerable, but also the process I used was empowering for me.
That is so amazing.
That's incredible. I remember when I had Lolo, I had a very long labor and like a long pushing time. But I remember getting to like a moment of true peace and clarity, which you were describing, where I'm just like trusting myself and there's not too much else I can do. And I was just like so present.
Mm-hmm.
And I do try to incorporate that same presence in my day-to-day life. I was actually pushing for 4 hours. So it was a long time of like being in that state. That's why I still like remember it so well.
Discomfort pulls you in.
On one hand, you get to the point of discomfort where I'm so limited in what I can physically or emotionally or do here. And except for this one aspect of it, I was really terrified. Like I was thinking as she's coming out, I'm like, oh God, is she going to die? Is she going to die? But at the same time, I also trusted. I trusted that like I was doing the best that I could, and so was everyone around me. And I still had the fear. That's like the thoughts might come and they'll just have to come and go. And I would rather release myself to the trust than the fear. Because the fear does actually have, it can have real negative medical outcomes for babies and mamas. I wanted to add that just because I don't want it to seem as if, oh, it was scary, but I let it go. It's like, no, I was actually scared shitless the whole time.
Yeah, you're really afraid.
Yeah.
We want to talk a little bit about breastfeeding. Did you breastfeed all three?
So Nugget was the hardest, I think in part because I hemorrhaged, my midwife and everybody were more focused on making sure I was okay naturally rather than having the time to sit back, let baby do skin to skin, and then bring baby to the boob. Nugget did not feed at all or nurse for me at all. We didn't try until the following day, I think it was. And those first few hours are pretty critical for breastfeeding. So it actually took a couple months for her to be able to breastfeed without assistance. And we did so many things. We actually did cranial sacral therapy with her, and that helped significantly with helping her to get a latch.
Can you tell us about that? I've never heard of it.
Oh, okay. So cranial sacral therapy is when a cranial sacral therapist will gently touch bones either around the head or within the mouth. And it's this very gentle pressure. It's not hard pressure. It's very subtle. But what it does is it gets things in line so that baby can comfortably latch, basically. It was amazing because every time we saw the craniosacral therapist, the nugget latched like that, just immediately. And then it would wear off, and then we'd see her again, and then it would just be shorter moments in between the appointments where she would be able to latch. And in between that, I used the nipple shields, and that helped in between. And so eventually we were able to take those training wheels off, and she was able to nurse by herself. But it took a solid 2 months.
How did you balance breastfeeding with the other aspects of daily life?
Tina was a cinch. She nursed right away, and it was fine. She took a latch. It was easy peasy. Bear was the same, actually. She nursed right away. With Nugget, with the first, there's so much geometry that you're trying to figure out. Wait, where does your head go? Where's my hand go? Oh God, am I gonna break you? And honestly forgot how to breastfeed with each baby because it's like I have the first one, stop breastfeeding. Wait, how do I do this again with the second? PT latched right away, and P had time off from work. I had help with Nugget. So I was able to have the time and the space, frankly, to be able to nurse PT because P was able to watch Nugget for a long time. I will say it was a blessing that PT was able to nurse quickly because I hurt my back pretty significantly and I couldn't actually hold her like standing up. I could only hold her while I was like sitting down. And so there was very little I could actually do at that point because of my back pain. So it was a blessing that she figured it out on her own. And then with Bear, it just wasn't a big deal. She was born early. She was just so tiny for the first few days that it was more about, oh God, am I going to hurt her? Was she going to snap in half? But no, it was, again, P had time off. I've been really privileged. He's had time off when I've given birth with the girls. So I've had support around me. And that time his mom was here too. And she cleaned. That was amazing. Where we live, we don't have family around. So I was tremendously grateful that I had him to help with each birth because otherwise it would have been a lot harder.
Each child comes differently, and then it's just so different. Just from moment one, it's always interesting to hear the differences. I'm the youngest, so I'm biased. I always love the youngest in the family, especially the youngest girl. We're like the life of the party. Okay, let's move into talking about postpartum. Every phase of trying to conceive, pregnancy, labor, delivery, postpartum, they are challenging in their own unique ways. We wanted to talk about postpartum with you for our listeners to just gain insights and maybe to learn something new that they've never even thought of before. During your postpartum, did you experience any mental health experiences, and what kind of support did you find helpful during your postpartum?
Bear was the easiest postpartum, I would say. But from a physical standpoint, Nugget was challenging because I bled. So I was just very tired. It was my first time with a baby. So it was the first time being absolutely exhausted and having to wake up all the time. I just remember the first night we were back in the house, she woke up crying, and I was just like, angry because I wanted to go to sleep. And so P was there and he just took her, which was great. I was grateful. With Tina, that was very tricky because she was born in April 2020, like peak COVID. And so I was scared to death of all of us getting sick. Additionally, it was Nugget was 2.5, not quite 3, and really having a hard time adjusting to Tina being around. And I had no idea how to handle that behavior. Her behavior, along with the pressure of COVID, and we were in California. So it was also, we're at some point like trapped inside for a bit of time, anyways, simply because of the smoke. So it was all just compounded. Now that I think about it, I do feel like I had some postpartum depression of some kind. I just had so much anger. I was so angry and anxious. And I also had this back injury, which was tremendously painful. And so there were these compounding circumstances. Part of the hard part of an unexpected negative postpartum experience is seeing myself do things I didn't think I would do, like screaming at my 3-year-old to where she was frightened of me, that kind of thing. I thought of it as being circumstantial, not necessarily just my reaction to her, but like, oh, it's just this stuff is happening and it's all sort of, it's this tantrum, it's the smoke, not being able to leave the house, COVID. And yes, that is all a buildup, but I also think that there was something going on with me that didn't, I didn't think of it as being a postpartum mental health issue until at some point. PT was, I think, 6 months old, and she was crying, and Nugget was having another epic tantrum. And I just remember yelling, "Shut up," to the baby, to Tina. And that's entirely out of line, like she's a baby. I hit a kind of low mentally where I finally recognized it as being something that needed to be addressed. I had a therapist at the time, but that in combination with some other personal work, I had to really actually start to work a bit harder understanding that it was a problem, that this was happening, and also that I need support and help with this. And what can I do to help myself, really? Earlier, I mentioned how, like, with bedtime, how at the moment I'm the high value parent. And so when I said that it has taken some years to get here, I think it has to do with that postpartum experience. It wasn't just traumatic for me. It was traumatic for Nugget too, because she had to contend with a mom who was in a hard place.
Yeah, in a hard place.
So I'm grateful that years later, now I'm actually the high value parent. I keep doing enough to work to where she wants to be with me.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Postpartum is really tough. And I do think the hardest part can be exactly what you described. You're in it. So recognizing that it's not just the things happening, which is the logical part of the brain kicks in, I think. Of course, I'd be feeling away. This is happening, that's happening. But actually going a little deeper and realizing, am I okay? Further, who do I talk to? Who do I tell? What support do I need? It's really tough. I think it's important that we talk about those motherhood moments as well with one another. And hopefully that can offer community support, even if we don't know you personally, just knowing the story and hearing Emily share.
Absolutely. And I think just normalizing these awful feelings that you had, it's pretty common and pretty normal to go through postpartum.
Yeah.
The hormones are going absolutely wild.
Yes, they are. Going back to what you're saying, the community support aspect of it, it's hard to be honest about these things. We can say, oh, it's hard. Oh, I got really upset or whatever, but like to be specific about what's actually happening and like the words we use, the volume we use, the tone, our body language, like to be specific about all those things and to be honest about it, I think it helped to paint a picture of what I was actually doing. And I think, had I known more about other women who experienced that kind of thing, I might not have thought of it as just being circumstantial. There was an article in the New York Times, and it was this woman who was recounting motherhood anger. And the whole article was about her contending with her anger. And for her, it was like, don't hit my kid, don't hit my kid, don't hit my kid, like over and over again. And doing whatever she could so that she didn't physically hit him or scream at him. And the terror and the self restraint that has to happen in order to acknowledge what you're feeling while also doing right by yourself and the kid is just unbelievable. It's incredible. And so, in that article, I wish I could remember the author's name, but I also wish I'd read it earlier because it always helps to not feel so alone.
Yeah. We'll try to find it and link that in the show notes.
You've done a great job of painting a vivid picture of really the differences and some similarities between each pregnancy, each labor, and then each breastfeeding journey. Can you tell us a little bit more about how your career journey was woven in between your three children?
Yeah. I stopped working right before I gave birth to Nugget. I didn't know I was stopping working. I thought it was a pause. P got a job outside the state, and so we decided that we would move after Nugget was born. So I stopped working, and then we moved out to California, and I had worked landscape architecture is I feel like it's such an important profession and one of the last sort of generalist professions. Landscape architects can do everything from design a parking lot to managing tidal currents in the New York Harbor using oysters in order to protect the shoreline to designing a park to designing a front yard and engaging everyone who might be affected or impacted in that process too. Landscape architects they have their hands in a lot of different pots usually, or the good ones do, in my opinion. I really love it, and yet the day-to-day of it was really unpleasant for me. It wasn't worth it, frankly. Knowing the type of schedule that it required and the sort of dedication, off hours, weekends, all that stuff, I had the choice. P had a job that could support us. So I chose not to go back to work because here I could be with my baby and get to be there for all the moments for as long as I wanted and also not have to contend with all of these other aspects of my job. Even though I love the profession, I was not in love with the job of the profession. I had a strong ecology background, and a lot of what we would do within community engagement, we would work with communities, we would do arts-based activities that would give solid deliverables for a community plan or project that was happening. And with my kids, the community engagement part, no, they're nowhere around that, but they're around the ecology piece of it. So we talk a lot about life cycle, about all the plants that we use on our property. For example, we took down trees and made a playscape with those trees. We left the stumps on the trees so that the roots could break down and then build up the soil. And who doesn't love a good tree stump to sit on? And kids love tree stumps. And I say all that, it sounds disparate, but for me, my background is about not just understanding the ecology of how plants grow individually, but as a system and how they can benefit one another as well as the humans who are around them. But how can you also functionally use the landscape around you to nurture my kids?
Very cool. I love what you talked about incorporating your background, how it's influencing the activities you're doing. Very cool.
With my kids, we've got chickens. And so they know that like the chicken poop is going to help this stuff grow. And also, like, we get to eat the eggs, and we just killed some roosters so they can also provide food, right? And they're there for that. Like, they understand where these things come from,
Mhm.
and they're beginning to at least physically see how they work together. That's important to me. You don't need chickens to figure that out, but it's like, it helps to know that not all meat comes in a package.
Renee wants to have chickens one day.
I'm on a deep mission to figure out where I can move
Mm-hmm.
in the budget that will, of course, get us everything we want. And something on that list is being able to have a few chickens.
Mm-hmm. They're so fun.
How many do you have, Emily?
We only have 9 right now, but at one point we had over 20.
That's awesome. And every time I drive past your house, I always feel a sense of joy. And now I know why.
Yeah, now you know the story. Keeping with how you brought your career background into your parenting, how do you continue to like foster independence and resilience in your girls through your parenting style, if you have a parenting style?
There's some things that I keep in mind. It's like you hear something and it's, oh man, I'm going to pin that. Yeah, I got to remember that. And there are a few, like one, law of natural consequences. P and I are generally big advocates of that. So with the girls, it's okay, you're not going to wear your jacket. I guess you're going to find out what that feels like in 30-degree weather. We're not going to put them in danger, right? We're not going to leave them outside for hours like that. But we get to try to let them experience their own consequences. And that's not always easy. Like I was at Costco yesterday and PT was in a tiny leotard it was a tank top leotard with shorts, right? And she had a beanie on and boots. And that was what she was wearing in 30-degree weather. So there were a ton of old folk who were just like giving me the side eye at Costco. It's like, whatever. If she's fine, then okay. Then I get to listen to her. I'm not going to force it. Plus, she gets to have a little bit of dignity in making her own choice. There's a comedian who I really like, a stand-up comedian named Kamal Bell. He's got 3 girls, and his youngest, he was talking about just letting her run through the airport, like at a distance from him. Like he always has her in his sight, but he lets her run at a distance. And he was like, he's Black, his girls are mixed race, but like, he was like, the world is going to tell her to bend to its whim or its will throughout her whole life. It's going to tell her that you have to act and be a certain way. And for him, letting her run through the airport at a far distance from him not managing her or apologizing to the people around him or her, she gets to be who she is. These are grown-ups. They can handle a 3-year-old running. If they can't handle a 3-year-old running through the airport, God help you. She can be who she is and she doesn't have to apologize for it. And they can be the grown-ups that they need to be. And I really love that because I think of that a lot with my kids because I know I'm not alone in this. A lot of times when I'm trying to be polite, it's not because I actually want to. It's because I'm afraid of how I might look to other parents, right? Like, oh, I'm so sorry she's doing this. And no, she's 6. She's learning. Yeah, she might be a jerk. I'm not apologizing, and I don't want her to apologize either. I think of him in that stand-up special saying that about his daughter quite a bit because I feel like it's significant and important, and I try to remember how there are these micro moments in every person's life, but that over time mold who they are, and I think women, it's really easy to start to assume, at least for me, oh, I'm supposed to be quiet. I'm supposed to be small. I'm supposed to say I'm sorry. I'm supposed to smile. All that garbage.
I'm supposed to be sweet. So how is like how you're raising your girls, like how's it different from like how you grew up? Did your parents also have that kind of
Oh,
mindset?
I'm curious if anyone doesn't start laughing after that question. No, it's not at all how I grew up. Not at all. Culturally, I have a white Midwestern mom and an English dad. And those are two very emotionally repressed groups where there's a lot of the white Midwestern lady, right? Like a lot of passive aggression, that kind of thing. As much of a Midwestern lady as my mom is in a lot of ways, she's also not because she got very angry a lot. Like her rage was another person in our family. So I've been very sensitive to the impacts inappropriate anger can have on kids and the family as a whole. And then with my dad, there were unspoken judgments about how things were done. Often it ended up with their assumption of like, people are idiots. You don't do it like this. I can't believe them. There's something wrong with that person. So for me, I'm not perfect by any stretch, and I'm not getting this right every day, but I do my best to try to show what genuine, authentic emotion. I can have my emotion without being entirely controlled by it. That's important for me because when I'm modeling it for my girls, I want them to know that having emotion is safe and it's normal and it's valid. And it's actually very important to express as well. So that's a big part of how I'm parenting differently. Also, just like from a gender norm standpoint, like my folks are pretty traditional. And so with Nugget, we had a lot of hand-me-down clothes that were all boys' clothes. And so it was like, well, if that's what you're wearing. I am not paying for baby clothes. And so that's what we dressed her in. And we never pushed girl clothes on her. And then all of a sudden she turned 4 and it was like princess dresses. It happened like that. It was bizarre because it was not something that we pushed. And it was something that I was very uncomfortable with. But she's got her own journey and apparently princess dresses are part of it.
So what advice do you have for moms wanting to define a parenting style that's different from how they were raised and like their parents' parenting?
For me, I have these guideposts like that Kamau Bell line has been a very important piece of how I parent. And so whether it's someone's spiritual path or stand-up comedy or whatever, for me, what works is what are the things that have stuck? What are the sayings, the phrases, mottos, prayers, whatever they are that have stuck with me so that I can remember the parent that I want to be and the behavior I want to model for my kids so that they feel wholly loved for who they are and accepted and supported.
Such a great way to say it. I also have those things that I cling to, kind of like the North Stars. So we are on our final question, and it's been so great talking with you. So what is your normal evening routine? Once everyone is asleep, what do you do?
That's been switching up lately. There's that part of me sometimes, I'm staying awake. I'm watching whatever I want to watch for a couple hours, even though I know I'll regret it. But I do it because, so help me God, I'm an adult and I want time to myself and I don't want to think or be beholden to anything. So sometimes it's that. Last night I picked up a funny book, but I've been really trying my best to turn off my phone or computer an hour before bed because I'm woken up usually like once a night. And so I'm never really getting a full night of sleep. I'm trying to have better sleep hygiene, if you will, where it's like the electronics are turned off. I do my skincare, lotion, brushing my teeth, all that stuff. I am very envious of a friend of mine who goes to bed at 9 p.m. each night, and I have 9 p.m. bedtime goals.
And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Motherhood Moments podcast. We appreciate you because we know life gets busy. Maybe you are doing chores during nap time, on a walk, running errands, or rinsing berries. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. Vanessa and I are committed to keep sharing more motherhood wisdom. If you enjoyed this episode, please support us by leaving us a review. That's a wonderful way to show your support and let others know they are not alone. Until next time, and remember to check